There's a mode of artistic expression that's become popular in the last few centuries in the country of Japan. It's called kintsugi. It's the combination of two Japanese words, kint, which means gold, and sugi, which means to mend. Here's the idea behind kintsugi. The artist will gather together shards of broken pottery, plates and cups and bowls and the like, and then they'll create a lacquer that's mixed with gold that they mend the broken pieces together with. The hope is that it restores the original purpose of the piece that is. People who do this have been broken. Here's a couple pictures of what kintsugi art looks like, so you get to the idea in your head. They're quite striking and beautiful. And the people are called kintsugi masters. And they do it out of a deep care for the pottery itself. They have this belief that these pieces can never be too far gone, that it's never impossible to redeem and restore these works of art to their original purpose. And we as Christians, we view the cross of Jesus Christ somewhat similarly. The act that Jesus takes, the act that we remember each year on Good Friday, is similar to what a kintsugi master does. It's a descent into an experience of brokenness. And it's an act of mending to make something new. Turn with me in a Bible, if you have one, to Mark chapter 15. I'm going to be reading from verses 25 through 39. If you don't have a Bible, we'd love to get you one. Come up to me after service. It's on me. You will have a Bible. We want to make sure you have one during our services and for your own reading. Mark chapter 15, verses 25 through 39. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two bandits, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now so that we may see and believe." And those who were crucified with him also taunted him. And when it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And at 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he's calling for Elijah." And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now when the centurion, who stood facing him, saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was God's son." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We arrive at this passage in Mark 15 with the sobering scene largely already set. In the last few hours, Jesus has been proven innocent in front of multiple rulers, and yet the crowds clamor for his blood anyway. He's been given over in an egregious miscarriage of justice, where the state and religious institutions have abused their power and condemned an innocent man. He's been flogged, leaving open wounds all over his body. He's been mocked with a crown that's digging into his head, streaming blood down his face. And he's limped his way to the place of the skull, the place they call Golgotha, the place where death reigns. And he's carried his own torture device along the way. Most of his friends at this point have deserted him. Only one of his 12 closest disciples is here at his execution, along with his mother and a couple other women that have followed him. And now he's been violently pierced and hung on a tree. And it's at the culmination of all of these things that he cries out, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? My God, why have you forsaken me? The word that we use in our English Bibles to describe what Jesus is doing here, we say he cried out, but the word in Greek is stronger. It's like a shriek or a scream. He's saying, my God, where the hell are you? And if you're starting a religion, these aren't the words that you choose for your leader. From a worldly perspective, this is a terrible starting place. The wise father of your faith, who's healed people and gone through a powerful ministry, he's being tortured and executed and crying out in agony. We see nothing else like this across the history of our religious landscapes. Buddha and Muhammad, they had wise and sage and calm advice on their dying days. Jesus cries out. And so we learn right off the bat in this passage that Jesus is not some unrelatable stoic religious leader. Instead, he's the dead. We find that he's feeling deeply what so many of us feel. We find loaded into this deep and winding caverns of our humanity. And there's three parts of Jesus' cry that I want to dig into a little bit more that I think are worth reflecting on for us today. And the first of this cry is his words, my God, my God. And it can appear at first glance that at this point Jesus has finally lost hope, right? He's finally showing the cracks in his religious facade, but look closer. He cries out, my God, my God. And you don't use the word my and connect it with another word unless it's something that you're really close relationally to. If I told you, yeah, that's my Emily, right? Even if you didn't know that was my wife's name, you would know that I was close to that person, whoever it is. There's a level of intimacy that's implied when Jesus cries, my God, my God. He's not ambiguously wailing at the cruel world. He's not screaming into the void. He's crying out specifically to someone he knows. And so what looks like despair at first is actually an act of faith. When Jesus experiences the absence of God, as we all do at some point in our lives, he cries out to that God nonetheless. All of those parts of God that he knows to be true, the peace and the joy and the presence and the patience that comes with knowing him, he's crying out for those things even when he doesn't see them. And so we're learning here from Jesus that in our times of tempest and trouble, in our times of desolation and desperation, faith in God does not deal in cliches. Faith in God is not simply positive lyrics that we sing on Sunday mornings. Faith in God is not simply a ticket to comfort and ease. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is to cry out in lament. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is to invoke the very God that we cannot see, to cry out to the very God that we cannot hear. Lament is not a turning away from God. It's a crying out to him in the midst of our darkness. But we live in a world that wants to pretend like things aren't that bad. We live in a world that doesn't like to face up to brokenness. We avoid lament because we don't want to admit that maybe we've contributed to how things are in the world. Maybe our hearts are corrupt. Maybe our actions haven't been great. Maybe we're a part of this broken thing. We don't like to admit that sort of stuff. We avoid lament because we want to believe that we have control, that if we really set our minds to it, that we could fix things with time or energy or effort, we can make things right. And we've been saying this for centuries. We've always believed that human ingenuity can solve our problems, and yet here we are in 2021, full of hatred and sickness, anxiety and depression, and so much more. Think about how much of a rush everyone has been in during COVID to get back to normal, right? Everyone's always like, let's just get past this and get back to normal and then everything will be fine. As if the millions of lives that we've lost over the last year will just disappear. As if normal was fine. As if we didn't have any problems pre-COVID. We all want to believe that we've got things under control. And we can believe that for a little while, but eventually all of us face a crisis. And that God of comfort, that God of control, dissolves beneath us. When we don't lament well, It hurts us. There's an author named Soong-Chan Rah. He's a theologian. He wrote a book called Prophetic Lament. He talks about how important lament is for us. I've got the quote up here. The American church avoids lament. The power of lament is minimized, and the underlying narrative of suffering that requires lament is lost. But absence doesn't make the heart grow fonder. Absence makes the heart forget. The absence of lament in the liturgy of the American church results in the loss of memory. We forget the necessity of lamenting over suffering and pain. We forget the reality of suffering and pain. Friends, we need a God that can go into the valley of the shadow of death and bring us through it. We need a faith that can endure every part of the human experience, joy and pain. And Jesus' cry here is a reminder. We have that sort of God. We have that sort of faith. Lament is crucial because it allows us to do two necessary things. The first thing it allows us to do is to fully acknowledge the brokenness of the world. We don't shove it under these rugs and ignore it. We acknowledge it outright. We fully realize that the world is not as it ought to be. But if we stopped there, it would just result in cynicism, in nihilism. The world's messed up and there's nothing we can do about it. The second thing that lament does is it meets that brokenness and longs for the world to be healed by God. It cries out for God to show up in the middle of it. Underneath the cry of lament is both the assumption that this world of death and decay is not as it should be, and that God's character is one that hears our cries and will do something about them. Lament is both of those things at the same time. And so to cry, my God, it's not a loss of belief in God. It's actually an act of belief. It's trusting in who God is even when we don't see him. It's longing for him to make things right in a world gone wrong. It's a trust in the Spirit of God that moves through communities like this to heal what's been broken. That's why Jesus teaches us these words here, my God, my God. So that's the first part of his cry. The second part of his cry is the question itself, the question why. The interrogative of Jesus on the cross reminds us that when we cry out, answers to our suffering aren't always immediately available. Think about it in your own life. How often have you wondered why? Why do we have so many injustices committed against people of color in the United States? Why did this person die in my family in the way that they did? Why are there still people around the world who hunger and thirst when we have so much food and so much water? Why? And once again, we as Christians sometimes get a little uncomfortable with the why. We don't know how to handle it. We want to shove it back under the rug. And so we provide easy stock answers that don't really acknowledge the suffering in full. Somebody asks us why, and we say, because God is sovereign. Somebody asks us why, and we say, well, because God must be teaching you a lesson. Somebody asks us why, and we respond, God needed another angel. Instead of acknowledging and lamenting the fact that the world is not as it should be, we have a tendency to fill our lives with cliches. Instead of crying out and pleading with God to be God in the middle of suffering, we live with unhelpful half-truths. And friends, if Jesus, the perfect human, asks why from the cross, we have permission to ask the same question. There's no reduction of human suffering in Jesus, so let's not reduce suffering when we see it in the world. Let's instead see it and cry out for God to be God in the middle of it. So that's the second part of his cry here. The third part that I want to look at is the condition of Jesus on the cross, that he's been forsaken. This is the culmination of the why and the my God statements. Jesus, here on the cross, is feeling in full force the loss of relationship with the one who truly, deeply loves him. He's feeling all of the brokenness of the world on his shoulders. See, God designed the world to function harmoniously, with all relationships working together. We were made to live in relationship with God, to live in relationship with one another, and to live in relationship with the planet perfectly. And yet each of us, in our own ways, has decided to reject that oneness. We've decided to terminate our relationship with God, to fracture our relationship with one another, to neglect our relationship with the planet. And so that harmony we were designed to live with, it's been disrupted. And that's why we look around our world and see it in the way that it is. And you don't really need a full theological explanation to know that the world's messed up. That's actually the one thing that most people, whether they believe in Jesus or not, agree on. We know what it means to be God-forsaken. We know the death and the brokenness of the world in its myriad ways, because we've been through divorce and breakups. We've watched great and small injustices. We've chosen paths of pride or greed or lust or envy in our lives. And we see a planet that's groaning. We have felt what it means to be far from God. And in this moment, from the cross, Jesus is crying out. He's saying, I've felt it too. Jesus is taking on all of that God-forsakenness that we have felt or that we're feeling today. He's taking on the cost and the result of all of those fractured relationships. Here's an image that might help you picture what's happening here. Imagine that you and I are going to dinner in the next couple weeks. We're going to hang out, and we're obviously going to go get some tacos, because tacos are amazing. Who doesn't like tacos? So we go to a restaurant, and the thing about tacos is you can eat a lot of them. So you order a couple, and then you're like, I could use a couple more. And that carne asada was really good, so I'm going to get a little bit more of that. Maybe we get some appetizers, some chips and salsa, some horchata. And then, yeah, come on, amen. And then at the end of that meal, I tell you, hey, I don't have any money. I cannot cover the check. And it would be very sweet of you to say, oh man, I forgive you. That's nice. But the waitress or waiter is going to come with a check. Somebody's going to have to cover the bill. What we've done at this table has had actual results that need to be accounted for. What Jesus is doing here is he's paying the check for all of the things that we've racked up, for the check and the bill that we've escalated in our lives. But it's not just Mexican food he's dealing with. It's the pain of real hurting souls. He's taking on the cost of what we've done to God, of what we've done to each other, of what we've done to the planet. Think about the manifold ways that you've been harmed in your life. Think about the manifold ways that you've harmed others.